It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions, or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Icons. I'm Brant Kruger from Event Technology Consulting, being joined today by co-host Alex Plaxton from Little Bird Told Media. I always try to leave out the told. It's one of the best puns in the business, man, so I don't know why I always try to botch it. Good to see you, man. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's okay. You and everyone else.
So, Little Bird Told Media, Alex Plaxton is co-host. And we're being joined today to talk about sponsorships by Peter Pool. You know, I should have checked that before we started. Is it Pool?
It was pretty good. Actually, unpronounceable for every American.
Okay.
It's Pule, but this the character U is not pronounceable.
Like is it like an umlaut kind of thing in German? But I know you're from Luxembourg.
Exactly the umlaut. So.
Okay, all right, Pule. So I apologize for that. We were so having fun before the show, talking about how we hadn't actually met each other yet, and I neglected my duties as host to actually get your name right. So I do apologize for that. I'll see if I can get your bio right. However, since his youth, Peter has had a passion for both tech and business, and right after his studies, he created his first company, active in internet development and later in film production. Step by step, Peter became interested in sponsorship and discovered what all could go wrong in that area. This experience led to the creation of Sponsor My Event. Peter is active in developing Sponsor My Event's vision, the execution, as well as the marketing. Besides that, he often appears as a speaker at conferences, webinars, or, of course, podcasts, speaking about his favorite topic, inbound sponsorship. Welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Brent. 10 points for it. It was pristine. Couldn't have done it better.
Oh, nice. Well, for those of you who might recognize Peter, he was actually on episode 66. He's one of our return guests. This is one of the episodes that we decided we needed. There was so much jam-packed into it that we needed to bring it back and do another round of it as far as the state of sponsorships go in the industry. So as a previous guest, what we've decided to do is to stop asking the previous guests the same questions that we usually start with regarding what got you into the industry and what you'd be doing differently. So if you do want to hear those answers again, go back and check out episode 66 so you can find out Peter's answers to those questions. Instead, what we'd like to know, Peter, is for this episode, what have you been doing since the last time we talked to you? What have you been up to since then?
Well, that's very, very quickly explained. Sponsor My Event is still a startup. We're improving on a constant basis the platform and growing it. Now with roughly 40,000 event organizers who have signed up, becomes bigger and bigger. But we must say also that building such a platform, such a marketplace for sponsorship is not something which is very easy. So it's constantly a learning process for us. And we spent quite a lot of time over the last months also just learning and refining the things, becoming better and understanding how the sponsorship process is, what the requirements for sponsors are still, how we can even make it better also so that we can better connect sponsors and organizers. So that's basically what we have done over the last months. It's not necessary now the big steps, but it's the necessary steps that needs to be simply prepared just to grow further also in a startup.
So I have a question to kind of get us a bit started on. For those who don't know, I know there's lots of different types of sponsorship, but let's define what exactly sponsorship is versus, for example, a donation to an event. You know, what is it that sponsors expect that donors don't?
That's actually very simple. So we have, when it comes to donation, it's always something for the good cause. Someone wants to give money and to contribute something to a project just because he feels that it's the right thing to do it. And he doesn't expect anything in return, especially maybe from some higher power or whatever. But it's definitely without expecting that he gets some return of any kind. So it's just a donation. I'm giving something and I'm giving it because I want to give something. Sponsorship, in contrary, is something which is purely business. That means it's always, or most of the times, it's a company which is sponsoring, and they expect clearly visibility in return. They're sponsoring because they want to get this visibility during the event, and during or through this visibility, of course, they want to increase their sales, their visibility towards their clients, maybe also to enhance also the good feeling also that they have, and their brand, simply also brand perception. So that's always something which is expected from every sponsor. That means donation, no return expected, and in clear sponsorship, there's clearly visibility which is expected in return.
But I mean, with sponsorship, there's two kinds of sponsorship. Also, there's sponsorship where you give money, and there's sponsorship where you give a service in kind. So for an in-kind sponsorship versus an in-kind donation, why would someone who is doing it in kind anyway not want to be a sponsor? Like, why would they be a donor instead of a sponsor if they can get something out of it?
The thing is again that you can perfectly do some in-kind sponsorship by providing some services or products or whatever simply is not monetary for the event, and still, as this has a certain value also, you will still get the visibility in return. The classic example clearly for the in-kind sponsorship is if someone, for example, is a food sponsor. Let's say that we have a catering service who says, okay, we want to break into the market and we want to become more visible, and they're going to be ready maybe at the beginning just to sponsor the catering for a couple of events. So they provide their services, their products also for free, but instead, in return, of course, they would like to get the visibility during the event. That's in a stark contrast to maybe if someone says, okay, I have here 10 kegs of beer and I just feel that I should give them for free for an event, just to sponsor it, just to make a donation to the event and not expecting anything in return. So clearly, if we speak about in-kind sponsorship, it has always also a certain value, which can be, of course, transmitted through a certain return also in this case.
Makes sense. I know that for certain associations and certain events that I have done in-kind sponsorships as well, and I've also done donations where I don't expect anything. So it's always curious though, because the work on my end is the same regardless. So it's always interesting to kind of see, which organizations I'm willing to donate versus which ones I'm want to do it in kind.
Well, it's definitely a concept which is, especially for those who are not so involved in sponsorship, it's difficult to understand what in-kind, in-cash sponsorship is. I mean, we aren't Sponsor My Event. We handle both kind of sponsorships, so both in-kind and in-cash, but also people could also do donations over it, even though there are much better platforms for donation like GoFundMe or whatever, simply who are really specialized on this donation aspect.
So even someone is like me, obviously I'm more on the production end and things like that. Sponsorship is not my world, but even someone who is not in that world, I've seen a lot of those changes that have been taking place over the course of the last 10 years or so. The sponsorships are not the same now as they were, over the course of the last decade. What would you say are kind of the biggest changes over the course of the last 10 years as that you've experienced and seen not only in Europe, but around the world as far as sponsorship goes?
Well, sponsorship has always developed over the last decades, clearly together with the ad industry. And of course, as well with the behaviors of the people. That means we had at the beginning, when sponsorship was relatively new, it was very passive. So you were putting just a logo somewhere, and that was absolutely enough simply to attract the attention. Today we're speaking, when we speak about sponsorship, about something much more active and much more engaging also. So it's the interactive component which came in there. But that was a development really over a couple of years or even decades till it came to this point. Today also we see clearly that compared to back even only 10 or 15 years ago, that sponsors are more and more bringing added value to the audience and are really looking for this interactive engagement together with the audience. And that's a fundamental difference between the sponsorship that we have seen, let's say, in the 90s, where it was absolutely passive. So we could also say simply that today, both for the organizer and for the sponsor, there is a win-win-win situation, which is very important. not only the win for the organizer and for the sponsor, but clearly also a win for the attendees, for the audience. They need to take some advantage out of it, which is the added value that the sponsor is bringing. So that's maybe the biggest difference that we see compared to former sponsorship.
What kind of added value, or sorry, I just wanted to expand a little bit on that. Like what are the kinds of added value that you're seeing? Is it just content, or what exactly do you mean by that?
It can be from content to pure experience. Let's say a clear example could be you go to a conference and you have some car manufacturer who wants to present his new electric car, and they're providing shuttle service, for example. So that's clearly this added value, because it provides, of course, the added value for the attendees. They have a more comfortable life being driven from one location to another, for example. And at the same time, they will get the visibility. So that's a typical example of this added value which is created. Another thing is, for example, also if you have some content which is provided, additional information which is going beyond the event itself, this creates also by itself an added value. And this is always a stark contrast also when you compare it just putting the logo. Logo is something which is passive, and bringing added value is always something which is in the benefit of the attendee. And there are many, many different examples. So we are going to speak later also about more examples, what could be done, and some interesting things also, because I have a couple of things in mind as well there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun. I wanted to.
I am curious,
though. It's a good tease for later. Go ahead, Alex.
I am curious, though. When you talk about added value, there has to be a way to measure that value. And so there's tons of data now, right? There's a million data points that we can collect. So are sponsors getting that data from the events that they're sponsoring, or do the event organizers know that they need to be providing that data? What are the conversations that are being had, especially with things like social media sponsorships and different things and different ways to measure? You know, it's not just a logo on a sign anymore and saying, well, we had 23,000 people walk by that sign, so they must have seen your logo. Like, now we can actually say we know this many people interacted. So what is that conversation now?
Well, it's definitely something which is the whole analytics for sponsorship becomes more and more important. And as you say, just how many people have seen a logo doesn't make any sense as a KPI. Today, you need to track how many people have mentioned the sponsor on the social networks, how many times someone has been tweeting about it, maybe also photos. And you have today, compared to before, you have tremendous possibilities to have tracking instruments where you can follow up on all these things with tools like TalkWalker, for example, who are just giving you instant analytics about what is going on, who's going to mention what, and all this in relation to sponsorship becomes a very, very powerful tool. At the same time, of course, sponsors are also striving more and more to use technology so that they can track right at the event also who has been engaging right away with my brand. Be it that it's only someone who was giving the email address, that's a simple thing, but maybe also someone who was taking part in any activity which has been organized during the event by a sponsor. So all these things can be tracked quite easily. Thanks also to evolving event technology, because the technology is going further and further. Let's say like this, you have beacon technology, you have Bluetooth technology, you have event apps, which are a fantastic possibility also to track if people were engaging here and there. So all these things are today possible. So basically, the interest of every sponsor is right from the beginning to find a way to interact in a way with the attendee so that this interaction can be tracked over a longer duration.
Interesting.
What are some other things, in addition to the technology and things like that, what are some other things that are driving these changes towards more active sponsorships? Is there anything else that's driving this really? Absolutely.
I mean, when we see how the people, so those people who are attending the events, how they're acting, it's completely different compared to what we had, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. It's simply because the behavior of the people are changing. We're surrounded today by a world which is extremely fast compared to, let's say, 20 years ago. The media, everything is faster. If you compare the speed of the ads which are shown on TV, That's something, if someone would be beamed now from, let's say, 1975 to today, he would be completely overwhelmed by the speed which comes to him. And that, of course, has a clear impact also on sponsorship. Simply something which is not compelling, which is not interactive, will not be seen anymore. And the human brain gets more and more focused also in blending out and ignoring those things which are not really relevant to us, because otherwise we couldn't survive anymore. And that happens actually also when you go to an event and just barely have the logo somewhere. You will not simply see it anymore, because your brain is now more and more trained just simply to filter these things out, because they're kind of trash for us. So that's what is one of the things. The second thing where I feel which is very important is clearly this instant availability. Everybody is used today to have everything instantly available, and that's the same also for sponsorship. People don't want to wait for any results, and that's also, of course, when it comes with the interaction with a sponsor. They want to have it instantly. Today, you don't wait anymore for a TV series to start at a certain day of the week. You just connect on your Netflix, you connect on your YouTube or whatever, and you just watch it right away. And that reflects also in the sponsorship. Permanent, immediate availability.
So you would think that technology would make these things easier, but it sounds like it's actually harder now with technology to reach a consumer than it ever has been before, because we are tuning these things out. On commercials on TV, we can just skip through them. On the internet, you can pay $1 and never see commercials. At an event, you've got different ways. People are pulling out. They don't want their logos places. So is it actually harder now to sponsor an event?
It's contradictory, I would say. It's actually the funny thing. On one hand, it becomes much easier because of the technology, and at the same time, it becomes more difficult because of the technology. On one hand, we have fantastic possibilities today to engage with the people. There are so many possibilities, and those who are using these new technologies in a very skilled way, they have a clear advantage over those who are not using them. And that's why I say it's something which makes it much more difficult for the sponsors just to stay ahead maybe of the competition, because you need to adapt constantly. And I'm not speaking here anymore about developments which are taking place maybe or which are taking 4 or 5 years. It's something which sometimes 6, 7, 8 months or so, where you just need to adapt to completely new things which are popping up somewhere, which become trendy and then disappear also again. So that makes it on one hand easier, because you can do these things, and these things are very often also available for not even such a high amount of money simply, but they are affordable simply. On the other hand, it requires a tremendous effort also from the time, also from the sponsor and also from the organizer, just simply to stay up to date with everything and to propose the right things without, and that's also something which is very important, without also neglecting that not every attendee is maybe also so tech addict that he would use right away something which is new. We're speaking here, for example, about augmented reality. It's a fantastic topic for sponsorship, but there are not everyone, first of all, knows even what augmented reality is. Second, not everybody is equipped with smartphones which might be able to support augmented reality. But in 2 or 3 years, this will clearly play an important role. And those sponsors and organizers who are already diving into this topic right now and getting ready for it, they will have, of course, a certain advantage also in a certain amount of time.
Whose job is it to stay up to date on the technology? Is it the sponsor or the people who are offering the sponsorships?
I think it has to come from both sides. So when I see from my job, when we're speaking with sponsors and organizers, it's a nice mix. So we have sometimes sponsors who come up with crazy, interesting ideas and who are really up to date with everything. And then again, I have another call where I see clearly, okay, this organizer, he has clear ideas, or also the organizer just needs to be pushed from our side. I think what becomes probably more and more important also in the future will be these sponsorship consultants who really spend all their days basically just being up to date, proposing the right solutions and coming up with creative solutions also, using the latest technology with respect also of the availability and everything. So most likely, and that's what I predict, is that those people who are now positioning themselves as sponsorship consultants, they will become more and more important also in the future.
I want to kind of talk a little bit about, maybe this is kind of what you were thinking about getting into later, but if we can kind of talk about it now, talking about how we can use these sponsorships and add that value before, during, and after events. So kind of the life cycle of the event. So we've already kind of established, all right, we can't just slap a logo on it and be done. So what are we doing as we're exploring those new possibilities that are out there as far as those exciting new things we can do with sponsorship? What can we do beforehand, as we lead up to the event, during the event, and then after the event? Can you kind of lay out some examples of each of those scenarios?
Absolutely. Well, it depends very, very much also on the kind of event what you have. Let's say you can, just to give some ideas what could be done. If you have more, for example, a technology event, you could, as a sponsor, you could provide some technical means which are helping to sign up to the event, providing a system which is comfortable to sign up, for example, or a system which is providing to the attendees information prior to the event itself, which will be, in this case, then powered, for example, by a certain company, providing also information on their internet site. So these are things for conferences, for example, which could be done prior to the event. You could also build around an event a whole information network also. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work, of course, but it's possible still to do it. If it's a big sponsorship, it makes perfect sense also just simply to create this community around the event even before the event from the sponsor side by providing information, etc. Providing valuable help, of course, also maybe for certain things. If you, I was in contact recently with a company, for example, who's providing hotel rooms for conferences. So it's really specialized on these things. So you go to a conference and you will find specialized hotel rooms, eventually with discount rates or whatever. That's something which can be also perfectly sponsored, and where the sponsor can create a good image also. That's everything which can be done pre-event, I would say. Then when it comes during the event, of course, what we discussed already before, bring the added value, providing certain technology, providing a shuttle service, providing things which are fun also. I mean, people love fun, and sometimes conferences, events, normal events, sports events or so, they might be even boring. If you just bring in some fun moments, that can be a very good idea as well. And then, of course, also something which is very important after the event. The event is not over just when the event is over. For the sponsor, he needs to build up a long-term strategy based on inbound marketing also. Just simply keeping those people he has connected, the leads that he has connected, just to keep them alive, and over maybe 6, 7, 8 months before he can even close a sale also on it.
And not just the fun things too. And this is one of the things that I again, this is, sponsorship's not much my world, but one of the things that I loved at a conference a couple of years ago, and I thought was going to take off, was sponsoring downtime. That, taking those moments and actually saying, this empty hour is brought to you by so-and-so, so that you can go back to your hotel room and get a little work done, that kind of thing. I really thought that was going to take off, and I've hardly seen it at all. But, looking for those moments where you can actually say, and get your name out there in a positive way for something that attendees, I think, desperately want.
I think a better twist would have probably been, if you have a little bit of downtime, simply how can you use it efficiently and just providing connections. I mean, most of the people, when I speak about conferences especially, they would like to go somewhere and they would like to meet new people. If you as a sponsor, you facilitate this, then you're on the winner side also, because that's what people really want. I mean, I'm going to so many conferences and I see there are so many panel discussions and everything. The most important part is always the networking. And if you have some spare time and you will be able just to meet up people, maybe in a setting outside of the conference, even in a pub or whatever, and someone is facilitating this, or maybe organizing in the evening kind of a meetup in the bar for these people, then definitely that could work quite well. just providing simply downtime. That's another thing. So
Yeah, I went to a conference where about 3 years ago, the idea of being there by yourself and being the only person from your company there, they called it solo, had really taken off on Twitter, and people were meeting up with each other who all were there by themselves. And the next year, that group decided, before the opening reception, to have a happy hour where they all got to meet up together. And they had organized this themselves. And then the following year, finally someone got smart and said, hey, this group of people is doing this anyway. Let me sponsor this. So the third year, finally, we had a sponsor who sponsored it at a bar down the street from the convention center, and, provided the open bar and food for everyone. And it sold out, and it, people loved it. So what took off that third year, which I don't think anyone was expecting, was then a group of Black people who had started using a hashtag called Black at Inbound. The event was Inbound Marketing Conference. And so that took off, and then those people. So I guarantee you, and that was this past year, I guarantee you that next year some smart sponsor is going to sponsor a Black at Inbound meetup at some bar, because that's what sponsors are doing. They're creating active kind of meetup opportunities and networking opportunities. So I expect to see that a lot more. I'd be surprised if we didn't see that a lot more.
I had a similar experience also at the Web Summit, which takes place now always in Lisbon, in Portugal. But it's a huge event. Back then already, it was in Ireland. It was in 2014 that we had been there also as an exhibitor. It was already with over 20,000 participants. So it was huge, actually. And what they did actually in the evening in whole Dublin in Ireland, all the pubs were actually booked by different sponsors for their events in the evening. So you just could go bar hopping basically and meeting investors, other participants. Every bar was sponsored by someone else. So a little bit like you said also in this case. And that was something which was definitely a very successful sponsorship also.
A couple comments coming in via the Facebook page. We had Swugu just saying great insights and thank you, EventIcons. And then we also had Kathy Myers saying that we need to program more downtime into our program. So thanks for agreeing with me, Kathy. I agree. We need to have a little bit more downtime there. Back to the questions at hand. This is one I think, Alex, you wanted to throw something out, I think, regarding the investment and the activations involved. So I think that's more up your alley. So I'm going to let you handle that one.
So typically, sponsors will spend their investment plus, 50 to 100% of that, again, if there's an activation element. So sponsors are willing to pay more if there is an activation, but obviously the activation has to have a return on their investment. So what are the smartest activations that you've seen, and what made them so smart?
It's actually an example that I found somewhere. I think it was at a conference or at an event in Romania, so Eastern Europe. It was a brewery. They wanted to sponsor the event, and they wanted to participate by organizing a competition where you could enter the competition simply by entering your email address. And I think the main prize was a travel somewhere. And so the basic idea, or the first idea, would have been clearly simply, let's put a computer there with a keyboard. So you type your email address, and then at the end of the event or a couple of days after, you're going to receive an email that you might have won or not, simply. So that would have been the boring idea. But this brewery said, hey, let's do something a little bit more interesting and more activating. So they took beer cans. I mean, it's a brewery, so obviously they have a lot of beer cans. And they were taking beer cans and they were assembling them together and putting electric contacts on the top so that you could use it as kind of a keyboard for the computer. So basically the people were all of a sudden seeing there a big display with tons of beer cans in front. And at the beginning, of course, nobody knew what the heck is going on here and what do we have to do here, till someone discovered, okay, we have to type here on the beer cans, we have to type our email address just to enter the competition. And that was creating a buzz. I mean, everybody was going there, tweeting it, taking pictures of it, and just by curiosity, they wanted to do it simply just because they wanted to try how it feels to type on a beer can keyboard. And that's something where I feel it's a totally successful activation here, which was not even so cost intensive, because setting it up, it's not so expensive to do it, but it had tremendous success. It's a small thing, but it shows that if you have just some creative ideas, you can just boost your activation for not a lot of money, actually.
Interesting.
Barry, we're both just kind of skimming the questions here and absorbing all of these, as Will would say, knowledge bombs that you're dropping on us, Peter.
Well, it's very interesting because the idea behind any kind of activation is naturally to get them to spend as much time with you as possible and to then amplify that reach, right? So exactly. You want something that they're going to post about, that they're going to talk about, that they're going to tell their friends. I remember seeing one, and it was very simple. It was after, I believe, one of the hurricanes. It was Atlantic City, and they had a booth at an event industry conference. And they just had a station where you could stuff a teddy bear and put on it had a little t-shirt on the teddy bear that said, do AC, do Atlantic City. And it really didn't have anything that much to do with Atlantic City, but they were donating these teddy bears to hospitals. So people felt compelled to do it. However, where the genius in this was it's generating goodwill, but also it took about 5 minutes to create this teddy bear, to sit there and stuff it. And so while they're sitting there stuffing this teddy bear, the representatives from Atlantic City got to talk to you about Atlantic City. And you were stuck there for 5 minutes stuffing a teddy bear. So the genius was they had people standing at their booth for 5 minutes, whereas other booths that were maybe just giving something out, they maybe walked by and maybe spent 30 seconds at their booth.
Well, and that's how successful trade show booths were being designed 20 years ago, rather than just here's my squoosh ball. You designed a way to get someone to stop and do something while you talk to them and got their leads, which actually brings up a point about leads. I wanted to kind of get into a little bit more about lead generation. Obviously we've got a lot of changes coming in Europe regarding data privacy laws and things like that. In this age of data privacy, what are you seeing that's different regarding lead generation and leads being collected by sponsors? We can't just do a fishbowl anymore. So, so what is changing regarding this lead generation, especially with the European privacy laws that are coming, but just in general, again, around the world, as we're becoming more aware of privacy and how our data is being used?
The first thing is people should, sponsors and organizers, they should be well aware that transparency is key to everything. So if you're playing with open cards and if you're not misusing any addresses, then everything should be fine. Working anymore like buying somewhere data or just getting them behind the backs of the organizers or sponsors, that's definitely not a good idea to do it anymore. The thing is, organizers and sponsors should definitely focus, and sponsors of course more than organizers, but to create qualified leads and not only leads. I mean, it's really the quantity which is not so important anymore. It's more the quality and also the willingness also by the attendees themselves to give their email address or their contact details because they want to give it, because they see a real reason on it. And that's the first step actually. If you go this way, you might have most likely much less contacts, but the return rate also with a successful return when you're reaching out to these people will be infinitely higher, because you are starting to build right away a relationship with these people. And then comes, we mentioned before also, inbound marketing. Inbound marketing is really a technology which works very well here. If you have as a sponsor a strategy which is set up based on inbound marketing, which is going over 6, 7, 8, 9 months maybe, to build up a relationship of trust between you and those people who were giving you their contact details, then you're definitely on the right way. So you need always, of course, to be super correct when it comes to data protection, giving the people the possibility to sign out at any moment, to unsubscribe or whatever. But if you're nurturing these people over a certain time with information which are really valuable to them, Let's take the example. If you take a fitness event, a sports event, and you have a fitness studio who's there, and they will provide you over the next months with really interesting topics about how to increase your personal health, for example, then this is something which is valuable for them. And the people will either they will sign out, or they will consume it, and they will build up a positive relationship right away with the brand. And that's definitely the way to go, just instead of just collecting as much as you can, just going for quality and instead of quantity, definitely.
I do find that interesting because I've been to a lot of trade shows, and they've got these scanners now that'll just scan your badge and it gives them your information. And I'm always curious because no matter what booth it is, whether I actually talk to someone or not, if I'm anywhere near their booth, they're like, "Can we scan you?" I'm like, "All right, I know nothing about what you do, and I'm probably not your ideal customer, but sure, I know you have a quota you need to meet to come back next year, so go for it. Scan me."
You can't help but wonder if the boss at the end of that's just looking for the sheer numbers at the end. Getting some great interaction on Facebook, both Nick and Megan saying hi to each other and everybody else out there. Also a good question coming in from Andre. Peter, you said he's really curious what event in Romania you were talking about, works in events there, and really made me curious. Also, do you have any ties with the event scene there?
Actually not. So we had definitely not with the event scene, and I need to look it up again what kind of event it was exactly. So I have it in my links, so that's not a problem to find it out again. No, actually we have ties when it came to development side, because we had for a certain time we were working with an IT company in Romania. Fantastic guys in Romania, I must say, super skilled, and they became over the years even friends also. I know that the event scene in Romania becomes more and more vibrant also. So it's a country which is fully developing, and they're also on the tech side. They are super interesting, of course, and that's why also probably tech events also are becoming more and more important there. But that's as far as it goes from my side. So no direct contacts, especially also because even though we're a European company, our main market is with 80% definitely the US. So that's why we're focusing much more on the US market than on any other country in the world, except maybe for the UK also.
So I had a question because it makes me curious. I go to a lot of events, and some events they're able, their top sponsors come in at $1 million each, and then other events they can't get past 1,000. So what is it that exactly makes an event valuable? How do we understand, what exactly the value of an event is to a sponsor?
It's definitely the miracle mix, I would say, is a magic sauce which comes in here. It's a combination of different factors. First of all, it's absolutely necessary that the event itself is very compelling, and also the audience is compelling. I mean, no audience, no compelling event, no interest for the sponsor. That's obvious. This goes hand in hand with the lineup. I mean, if it's a conference, you need to have really interesting speakers. If it's a concert or so, artists which are on a high level, which are known, etc. That's something which is extremely important, because it will attract automatically also the right audience. What becomes more and more important, of course, is the social followership. We see very often in the past that even events which are per se compelling, but with a low social followership, they are more and more left behind by sponsors. They are not so interested, because the sponsors, they want to have this visibility through the social followership, being shared on Twitter, etc. I was speaking earlier today, I was speaking with an event organizer. They're organizing a tour for a DJ in more than 60 locations, or 60 different locations. And the interesting thing is that this DJ, he has 500K followers on Twitter. And that's something which creates a clear value. That's why this event, or this series of events, can be clearly interesting for sponsors. Then, of course, the geography plays a major role. For a lot of sponsors, it makes a big difference whether the event is taking place somewhere in downtown Manhattan or somewhere in the middle of nowhere in, I don't know, Arkansas or whatever, simply, unless there's a good reason why this event is taking place there, and makes it compelling because it just it takes place there. And then last but not least, of course, when it comes to the event organizer, every event organizer needs to have a certain pedigree. If you have no track record as an event organizer, it will be much, much more difficult to bring in the sponsors, because the sponsor, and that's something what event organizers very often also forget, the sponsor is not only putting the money into the event, but also into the team. I mean, the team is guaranteed for the success. And if they cannot provide this trust that they're able to make this event a success, and also thus to create the visibility for the sponsor, then the sponsor is not going in there. It's a little bit the same as for the startup world. I mean, I'm in a startup, and I know very well that investors, they are not investing in the idea of my startup, but they're investing for a large part in the team. And if the team is not a good team, they will not invest. Same for the event organizers here.
So, I mean, it seems to me that it's also not just about the money that's invested in it, but there's an opportunity for building the brand in general. So, I mean, I'm curious if just even off the top of your head, and if you don't, that's no big deal and we can move on. But, you know, are there any examples that you can think of where, you know, that brand building is really tied to the event sponsorship? You know, example would be like Venus Razors at the New York Fashion Show, or something like, you know, Bud Light, whatever USA, something along those lines. Are there any types of those events that you can say where it's not necessarily about the money that they're putting in, but that tying their brand to that event is what the benefit is that comes out of that, if I'm making any sense at all?
Well, I think a very nice example is GoPro. You have GoPro. They're sponsoring so many, not necessarily not only events, but they're sponsoring so many sports people, extreme sports also people, and you see so many video clips on the internet which are just breathtaking, and they're all labeled GoPro. And that's something which worked tremendously well. And so like this, and by using this approach, clearly everything which was action camera was basically GoPro. Everybody said action camera equals GoPro. That's it. Now, in the meanwhile, of course, we have a lot of competition for GoPro, and GoPro is not in the best shape also. But anyway, that's another thing. But I think it was a very, very successful strategy that they were running, just simply to be present and to pinpoint really the right people who were doing partly crazy things, which were extremely visible, and just bringing their cameras in there and having their logo on it. So it's less now from the event sector, but definitely GoPro is something which is cool. The same also when it comes to Red Bull. Red Bull was sponsoring so much, or creating so many events himself also, that in the meanwhile, I have almost a feeling that for some people, Red Bull stands partly more even for crazy or interesting events than for the drink itself.
How do you target, as an event organizer, how do you target the sponsors that would have that kind of visceral reaction for an attendee, that they're like, oh, that company is sponsoring this event, I need to be there? I don't see it very often. Usually it's just whoever is willing to give the most money, or someone who sponsors it year after year after year. But, you know, as an event organizer, do you have time to do that research? And how do you pinpoint who you want to sponsor your event?
Well, I know that time is a very scarce resource, unfortunately, especially for event organizers, and there are a lot of things to do left and right. Nevertheless, doing your homework and researching on the sponsors is something which should definitely not be neglected. The more you know about your sponsors, and the more you know what kind of target audience, for example, they have, what they expect, what kind of sponsorship they already did, the more successful you will be by being able to provide them also some tailor-made proposals. So that's a homework that every organizer should definitely do. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to convince them.
Interesting.
So just want to take this opportunity to remind folks, anybody who's tuning in live via Zoom, feel free to use the Q&A panel if you've got any questions for Peter, or use the Zoom webinar chat, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to chime in there as well. Otherwise, we'll just keep asking our questions. But we'd love to know what you think, and always want to be involved definitely. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in, and we'll feed him his way as we start to wrap things up. I'm curious, we touched on this a little bit, and it's kind of been a through thread, but I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on kind of the post-event follow-up. What do sponsors expect from us as the event organizers? What are they looking to get? We've talked about some of the kind of more subjective benefits, such as the brand recognition and things like that. What about other more like tangible things that they're really going to be expecting in that post-event follow-up?
Well, it's depends very much on the size of the event, on how deep the sponsor was getting involved in the event as well. So sometimes it can go from very simple reports where the sponsor just doesn't expect anything else, and maybe a couple of photos, or maybe just a quick conversation on the phone after it to wrap everything up. When it becomes bigger, it can easily go to fully fledged reports where statistics are expected, detailed statistics about the audience, who was coming in, what kind of demographics you had at the event, photos, much more often also videos today. There is no excuse anymore not to provide a video from an event. And if you want to make a report for a sponsor, the best tool is definitely simply to show the sponsor, look, this is what our event looked like. Not every sponsor will have the time to go to the event also, but if you can present a video where you say, look, this was it, and here, that's how we have been highlighting you. Look here, many people came to your booth, etc., etc. That's definitely a very good kind of reporting that you can do. And as I said, there is no excuse anymore to do it, not to do it actually, because we all carry around top cameras in the meanwhile in our pockets with our smartphones. Video editing software is totally available today. So you can perfectly make a decent 4 or 5 minute video without any problems. And this will boost your credibility also towards the sponsor. And it will help also to just bring in the sponsor for the next times also, because they know this person, this organizer is reliable. We can count on him. He is honest, and we can also work on a longer basis with him.
Question coming in from the audience. I think this was in reference to what Alex was talking about targeting sponsors that you want for your event. Is there any benefit to giving basically a free sponsorship that, if this is someone that you want to associate your event with their brand, so looking at it from the other direction, is there any benefit to saying basically we'll give you this sponsorship for free in hopes of maybe building that out and then converting it at some point into, I would assume, into a monetary benefit?
Absolutely. It's definitely legitimate to do this. We're working recently for an event, for a very high-level event in New York City for high net worth individuals. And the event organizers, they wanted to get in one particular sponsor because he had a very, very good reputation. And it was clear that if they would have this name associated to the event, this would clearly open doors also to some other sponsors who would come in, just simply because this name was already on the panel. So especially, I would say, if you're maybe not such a seasoned event organizer with a big Rolodex of contacts, and you want to build a certain credibility and reputation, then it's a good way to do it. And even if you're already seasoned, why not doing it from time to time? Simply, if you want to have a big name on your panel just to attract other ones, it's like a bait also for the other ones. So why not? Definitely a good idea to do it.
So here's a question that I believe came in from Facebook, and this is from Andre, and he asked, in terms of brands and events, reach on Facebook is being hindered by Facebook's changes in the coming future. And I know you already talked about passive versus active, and obviously the more active and engaged the posts are, the Facebook changes aren't really going to affect it as much. But what do you think organizers should be doing in order to keep brands still interested in what they can communicate for them on this specific channel, but also just in social media in general? Are sponsorships on social media being used a lot, or is it kind of something that people are overlooking?
It's clearly used. I mean, social media are definitely a key driver. So sponsors are looking for, as I said before, also for a solid social followership. I would say you need to evaluate clearly each and every channel depending on what kind of event you're organizing. So if you have a conference, it will be probably more LinkedIn, which will be used, Twitter for sure. If you're using maybe a sports, a community event, or maybe artistic event, it might be more Facebook, for example, which will be used. But it's definitely worth exploring all these channels and to provide visibility for the sponsors through these channels also. And also, if you're building up a concept, which is again leveraging the sponsorship in the way that it will create, again, also on the social media channels, maybe this added value, then it's definitely also a benefit for each and everyone.
Great. I know we are wrapping down to the last 10 minutes here. If you have any more questions, feel free to submit them now. But Brant, do you want to?
Yeah, very good. I think as we start to hit towards the top of the hour again, we can start to get into our standard closing questions, because those are likely to change as we move from time to time. So we decided to mix things up a little bit with the opening questions, but we'll keep the closing questions for now. So if you could pick only one, what is your one tip that you have for event planners when they are seeking sponsors?
It's very simple. You have to be the best salesperson ever that you could hire. Very simple. It's comes from the simple logic. You have a product that you want to sell. Your event is your product, and your clients are your sponsors. So if you're not able to do so, then you will have tremendous problems to find some sponsors. And that's exactly also what I see, unfortunately, very often on Sponsor My Event, that event organizers are just signing up their event, and they believe that just by publishing the event, the sponsors just will flock in and everybody will be running after this event, which is definitely not the case. You need to be active no matter what, no matter who's going to work for you, unless you have really an agency who's taking over all the different sponsorship aspects. You need to sell, sell, and sell. Now, the big problem is that many event organizers are definitely not salespeople and they don't want to do it. I was doing recently, last year, I was doing a seminar also. It was more for people from the art sector. And I told them, you need to swarm out, you need to go out, you need to find your contacts, you need to go on LinkedIn to connect with people, you need to go to networking events. And these people, they were looking at me partly and they said, yeah, but we're artists, we don't want to do that. I said, yeah, but you want to have at your exhibitions, you would like to have sponsors, right? Yeah, but I don't want to go on LinkedIn, I don't want even to sign up on LinkedIn. I said, yeah, but you want to have these people, so you need to go where these people are. So it was really clear reluctancy from their side, and they didn't want to do it. So, so that's why I keep on repeating it. Nothing comes by itself, and also you should not forget, you're in a Shark Tank. If you're going out there and you're looking for sponsors, you should not believe that your event is the one and only that everybody was waiting for.
So a friend of the show, Hans Ettman, was asking on Facebook on the Zoom panel, where do we find the Q&A? And sometimes it's on the bottom under More. So depending on how big you've got your Zoom panel, if you're watching there, you have to click on More and then on Q&A, and you can pick it up there. So feel free, again, if you're watching us live, to check it out there.
So one of our favorite questions to ask, and for those of you who may be new to the show or haven't checked out event-icons.com, every week we ask our guests for their favorite resources, and then we compile that list and we post it with the replay of the show on event-icons.com. So if you're looking for these resources, that's where you can find them. With that in mind, what are your favorite resources?
Well, there are many things. So I'm fascinated both by technology and also by sales and management. So I was reading actually, or listening at least to an audiobook which was pretty fascinating, which is called Pitch Anything. It's by Oren Klaff, and he says himself it's an innovative method for presenting, persuading, and winning the deal. So that's a book which was really interesting because he was presenting the whole pitch process in a little bit different way than it's traditionally made, very compelling how he was writing it. So I like this book quite a lot because it was inspiring. Cannot say anything else on this, but definitely worth also reading on it. Then what I like, it's more kind of a global technology step. I mentioned before, augmented reality on smartphones, tablet, etc. That's something which I found extremely compelling as a technology, and which will definitely completely change the way that we're going to interact in the future, also with people, with objects even. So that's definitely something where I would follow. I mean, Apple was releasing AR kit with a new iOS and with new phones. It's a first step. Google will just simply do the same and go in the same direction. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Then from technology-wise, what I discovered and what I found totally compelling, I mean, I'm in my second life. I have a second company, which is a video production company. So for sure, I love video editing, but I discovered Luma Fusion, which is a video editing software for the iPad. And I was using it now a couple of times on my iPad Pro, and I must say I'm impressed how easily you can really do even 4K videos on an iPad simply. You're filming it with your iPhone, then you're transferring it right away on the iPad, and you produce videos which are of a stunning quality. And where I would say, even with certain limitations, you could even use it as a professional video tool. And that's something which is totally compelling. Important also for event organizers who would like to make some videos. There is no excuse anymore. You don't need to have very expensive tools or so. Just download Luma Fusion or something which is equivalent, and you will have everything what you need. Another tool that I really like, and which is really something that I use every single day, is the HubSpot CRM and sales tools, which is a software which is not very expensive, but it's tremendous. I love this software, to be really honest, because it helps you to organize the contacts. And I always hated CRMs, I can be very honestly say. HubSpot definitely has changed my mind a little bit because it's easy to use, and it gives you so many possibilities to just keep every deal tracked, to keep the communication open with the people. So that's something which is fascinating. What we're using also inside of our company very heavily is Asana. So as a real project management, task management tool, which is even for free also when you are not exceeding certain limits. So that's not something which I can recommend definitely, because being organized and keeping track of all the tasks that you have to do, that's something which is so vital in every company, for event organizers, for sponsors as well. And you have fantastic tools out there. Asana is definitely one of those which are really, really professional.
Wow, that was a fantastic list, Peter. That was amazing. Like usually it's like, I don't know, I got a new app. It was kind of cool. You know, but that was an amazing list, and I am absolutely going to have to check out Luma Fusion, because I've been flirting dangerously with moving to an entire tablet-based life, and video editing has been one of the things that's been holding me back. Is I just feel like I need this truck, you know, of the MacBook Pro, you know, when I'd really love to be driving around in something a little sportier. So that's fantastic. We'll make sure we put all of those resources into the show notes at event-icons.com. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an amazing conversation. As always, the hour just flies by. So, Peter Pula, just take another shot at that. How did
Perfect. You got it right.
Gotta work on those umlauts. Work on those umlauts there. And so, where can we find out more about you, your company, what you're doing these days? Where can folks find out more information about you?
That's very simple. So the best way is simply our internet site, www.sponsormyevent.com. So that's the starting point. Then, of course, on Twitter, we have at sponsormyevent.com, at sponsormyevent. And if someone would like to write me, of course, info@sponsormyevent.com. If it's really interesting and relevant, it will be forwarded to me. No, I'm joking. So usually I'm always still reading all the emails as we're a startup. So I'm definitely not sitting somewhere on the cloud number 9 or whatever. So it's easy to reach out to me. Also, if you want to reach out on Twitter, at Peter Poehle, PeterPoehle. So very simple. No, not very simple. So there are different possibilities to connect with me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again so much for joining us. And Alex, thanks for being my co-pilot here today. Where can people find out more about you and what's going on in your world?
So you can find me at aplaxin everywhere on social media. And keep an eye out for the February issue of The Meeting Professional. That's MPI's publication, because you might see something in there. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. And I'm Brant Kruger, also Brant Kruger everywhere on the internets, BrandtKrueger. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on Event Icons. We're recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can also watch behind the scenes as we record on Facebook Live. You get all the raw footage when you watch us on there, including our mistakes and mess ups and false starts and things like that. So please join us there if you want to kind of watch behind the scenes. Otherwise, the audio and video versions are released the following Tuesday on iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, or wherever your favorite podcast app is. And then the video version is released on the Endless blog at event-icons.com. However, all of that is just one nice way of saying it, but the best way of joining us each week is to sign up there at event-icons.com so you can join us live on Zoom. You'll get the link sent to you every week. You'll be here. We'll be live. You can interact live with our guests so you can be a part of the conversation, which we always love. We want to know what you think. Give us a shout out there. Give us a shout out on Twitter, #EventIcons. Let us know who you want to be on the show. We want to bring on the event icons that you want to see and ask them the questions that you want to ask. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Event Icons.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.